Du débat, continuing debate, the honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I rise today in the House, February 2nd, I want to pay homage and respect to my party leader who resigned today from being our party leader, the official opposition. Being in the job of party leader in an opposition party is an incredibly difficult job, and he has done yeoman's work over the past couple years. In a time when Canada was locked down, expectations of what we need to do as a country have changed dramatically, and we continue to try and adapt. This is a difficult time to be in this kind of job, and I pay respect right now to him and his family for having committed and having given so much to this country, to our party, and to this Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. But I'm here today to address the new Bill C-8 proposed by the Liberal government about how to address some more spending that we need to commit for coming through COVID, and new spending that some of which we find is going to be on the backs of Canadians again. But this bill is in 7 parts. 7 parts, this bill. I can't address all 7 parts adequately in this sitting in the next 20 minutes. So I am going to focus on the real estate part of this bill, as my colleague across the way spent a lot of time on the real estate section of this bill as well. But starting in the 2022 calendar year, we're going to look at a 1% federal surtax on passively held non-resident owners of real estate in Canada. That means that foreigners that buy real estate in Canada are going to pay an extra 1% annually on the value of the real estate, much like, if you think about it, for those people that own property or own their single-family home, like the municipal tax. So we're transporting some of this tax mechanism that usually rests at the municipal level, and we're putting it onto the federal government's balance sheet at this point in time. For what effect, I don't know, but it is an overstep into municipal jurisdiction that seems a little bit of an overstep, and I'll give some examples here. But first, I'm going to refer to what my colleague across the way was referring to, a report by an organization called Generation Squeeze, which was commissioned by the Crown Corporation, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, to actually look at ways to get more housing built in Canada. Well, it didn't look at better ways to get more housing built in Canada. What it looked at and what it reported to CMHC, and it was paid to do this, of course, was to actually look at ways to tax more housing ownership in Canada. And their proposal was, much like this one, a 0.5% surtax annually applied on properties over $1 million. I know that sounds like a big number. The annual surtax doubles on properties over $2 million. Now, Vancouver itself has an empty homes tax already, effectively the same thing as what Generation Squeeze is providing, except it's 3% of the assessed value, and it's been applied since 2017. So 0.5%, 1%, 3%, but there's more. There's more, Mr. Speaker. In addition, the province of British Columbia has a speculation and vacancy tax applied on such properties, starting at 0.5% for a resident and going up to 2% for an offshore property owner. And that's been applied since 2018. So 3% plus 2% plus 0.5% plus this proposed 1%. We're really just tacking on and on and on here, and really overstepping as far as which level of government is collecting this, and what are we trying to accomplish in this? Foreign ownership still accounts for approximately 7.7% of Vancouver home purchases. So we still are getting a lot of foreign ownership growing into the housing base in the Lower Mainland, despite the fact that we're tacking on significant taxes here that we're supposed to slow this down. This is a great discrepancy between the actual people that work in the city and the people that are coming to live in the city. And that is one of the major factors that's pushing up housing prices in Canada, but particularly in the Lower Mainland. Have we looked at the increase in home values under this Liberal government? In the last 6 years, housing has gone up. A typical family home has gone up 87%. So since this government has come to power, shortly thereafter, 6 years ago, average price of a family home in Canada is up 87%. That's inflation. Because since 2016, it was $476,000, now it's $811,000. This is according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. Are we trying to jam the price above $1 million just to collect the proposed federal surtax? Because the average house in Toronto and Vancouver now sell for over $1 million. Let's think about that. A home costs over $1 million in two of Canada's large cities. Not counting the interest paid on mortgages, not counting the upkeep required on a regular basis, not counting the maintenance, not counting the furniture and window coverings. To get into a home now is over $1 million starter home. Yes, the costs of home ownership are going through the roof in Canada, and I'm not talking about bungalows, not even split levels, not even 2 stories, all single-family homes. What has caused this? The government keeps professing that it needs to spend more and thus collect more to build more housing in Canada. Who's going to pay this tax? Well, home sellers, which, according to Generation Squeeze, again, are primarily retirees. And they've made gains in the value of their home that is not taxable at the federal level, so they obviously deserve to pay more tax in their retirement years, according to Generation Squeeze. This is a ridiculous oversight of the financial snapshot faced by retirees in Canada, many of whom are and will be abetting their incomes by working longer and receiving government programming like the Guaranteed Income Supplement. So the proposal from Generation Squeeze, commissioned by an arm of this government, is an inequitable tax grab on some of our most vulnerable citizens. I will oppose it strongly. Why are seniors having difficulty saving for retirement? Inflation, inflation, inflation. Things are costing more. People's incomes are not going up on a commensurate level. A real monetary factor that this government is not really paying attention to. As the Prime Minister said during the election, he doesn't really think about monetary policy. Unfortunately, government should be thinking about monetary policy. This year, and I'll point out to the government, our CPP payments, everybody in Canada has an increase in their payroll tax of 10%. If a 10% increase in our CPP isn't more reflective of inflation people are actually feeling, I think the government is trying to mask something here. CPP, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, has said their investments are sound for what they're expecting to spend for the next 75 years. But the government thinks a 10% increase in deductions is important at this point in time. That might tell us what they think the real rate of inflation is in this country, because most consumers have lost faith in the numbers calculated by Statistics Canada and the Bank of Canada. They're meaningless as far as what they're experiencing in the stores, in their rent, at their doors. Everything they pay for in Canada is going up significantly more than is indicated by StatsCan or indicated by the Bank of Canada. Yet, going back to housing, our housing takes up more than 11% of our gross domestic product, partially because we don't have much more gross domestic investment going on in this country, so most people build into housing at this point in time, but also that's a double of where it's usually been in this country. It's usually around 4 to 5%. It's north of 11% of our gross domestic product going into residential housing at this point in time, and has been that way for a number of years. And yet, supposedly, we're still short of housing stock. But which housing stock? Single-family homes? To be precise, starter homes? Well, I'll tell you, knocking doors in Calgary Centre, when I knock condos, some of those buildings have a 50% vacancy rate. 10% plus vacancy rate in apartment buildings in Calgary Centre. But developers are still building more condo buildings, encroaching on neighborhoods filled with single-family homes. This is referred to as densification. Condo resale prices are down 15% over the past 6 years in Calgary. And Calgary's downtown commercial core has been decimated by the government's aimless policies towards Canada's most productive industry, oil and gas. The City of Calgary's approach is to spend taxpayers' dollars to retrofit some of their vacant office towers into residential towers in the hopes of bringing life back into the downtown core. at a cost of over $400,000 per door, which contrasts with a new build, which has cost around $250,000 per door. So we're overspending to solve a problem the government created in the first place. So we're just supposed to ignore the negative effects of the outcome of what we're doing here. We can't go on doing that. We have to look at the outcomes. If you're a young condo owner, a loss of 2.5% per year on your condo is a daunting issue, especially as you try and get into a single-family home at some point in time. So we have government dollars chasing retrofits to a problem the government created. And round we go. Someone is paying the bill. Let's go back to inflation. We've incurred over $560 billion of deficit spending over the past 2 years. 1/3 of it, over $170 billion, had nothing to do with the COVID pandemic. Never miss out on a good crisis to move an agenda forward, as the Liberals have said. Well, let's look at more things here as far as inflation goes. Let's look at what we're abetting here in the process. Let's look at where the numbers are actually leading us, because, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm somewhat analytical at looking at what the solution to these problems might be. So some of this money coming into Canada, as we said, 7.7% of the purchases in Vancouver are still foreign money coming in. Investment properties are on top of that from Canadian investors, but much of this foreign money is not clean foreign money. Much of it, according to Corruption Perceptions Index from Transparency International, is actually money laundering, what they call snow washing. And snow washing happens in Canada more so than any other country in the G20 for one reason, because we allow it to. And this government keeps the rules as far as money laundering coming into Canada loose, and it is a shame for us in an international sense around the world. The National Criminal Intelligence Estimate on the Canadian Criminal Intelligence Service says that dirty money laundering of about $133 billion per year is one of the factors driving up real estate prices in Canada. And the last year, let's recall, real estate prices are up 26% for a typical family home in Canada. This is corruption. We're allowing corruption to enter Canada. And I know some people think it's just the money part of corruption. Well, the money part of corruption leads to all other kinds of criminality. So when you actually invite dirty money into the country, you're inviting everything else associated with that dirty money into the country. And take a look at the actual fentanyl deaths on the streets of our cities, including Calgary, where I live. Fentanyl deaths, overdoses, homeless people living in the streets. These have abounded in the last number of years because of these laws that allow people to launder their money into Canada and bring with it the commensurate crime that arrives with dirty money laundering. This is a problem. We need to address it. This government needs to address it. I'm concerned this government doesn't want to address it because it is complicit in a lot of areas where it's actually involved in what we'll call shady practices. And that includes SNC-Lavalin and the cover-up of what happened there, the ditching of one of the brightest lights on the Liberal front bench who tried to expose what was going on there. This includes the WE scandal and the hundreds of millions of dollars that was buried in bureaucraties before we could actually get to actually following the money trail. And this gets to actually where we actually are today, which is how do we come through this and actually build a system that isn't inflationary, that doesn't have to continue to have government money being thrown at the wall, and continue to not solve the problems in issues like housing. Housing's a big issue. Putting a 1% extra tax on top of housing is not part of the solution. Curbing foreign money laundering is in the federal government's bailiwick and should be instituted as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, I know I'm running out of time, but it is my pleasure to be here today again, and I thank you for allowing me the time to speak on behalf of the citizens of Calgary Centre. I do propose that we actually start with legislation that leads somewhere, and as opposed to an extra tax that's already being applied locally and provincially in many areas in Canada where it's a problem, we actually look at how we address money laundering laws in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the member for his intervention. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know that this member would not want to intentionally mislead the House. I know he wouldn't want to do that. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, when he says that we're adding a 1% tax on sale of housing, he knows better, because he knows that it's specifically with respect to non-resident, non-Canadian, vacant land or unused housing. But he's projecting it as though it's going to be a 1% tax. He equated it to a municipal property tax. And I'm sure he knows better than that. Would he like to correct the record and acknowledge the fact that it is for non-Canadians, non-residents, on vacant land or unused residential housing?
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, and I thank my colleague across the way. If I left that impression that was for anything other than what he described, I am remiss, and I apologize if that's the way he took those remarks, and if I misspoke in that respect. He is exactly right. It is for foreign-held property that's coming in, foreign money that's coming into Canadian property. As I said earlier, it is actually on top of a municipal tax applied to it and a provincial tax as well, including a transfer tax of 20%. What I'm suggesting to him is he take a look at this as far as the federal government's incursion into the same taxation measurement as municipalities are already taxing, provinces are now taxing, and say, why does the federal government need to be there, as opposed to act where the federal government has jurisdiction currently and address the money laundering laws. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie mon collègue, le député de Calgary Centre. Quand on parle de problématiques de logement, d'ailleurs, dans ce projet de loi, il faut dire qu'il y a eu un retrait pendant 20 ans de la stratégie nationale sur le logement pour fixer l'ordre de 6 000 logements par an qui n'a pas eu lieu. Puis d'ailleurs, le Front d'action, le FRAPU, a mentionné qu'il y avait, depuis 1994, il y a plus de 80 000 logements qui n'ont pas été sociaux, qui ont été mis en place. Donc, puis d'ailleurs, au Québec, il y a à peu près 50 000 logements qui en arrêt de besoin. Et que pensez-vous des propositions qui est prévues dans ce projet de loi C-8?
L'honorable député de Calgary Centre.
Je pense que j'ai compris la plupart de ce que mon collègue a dit, mais c'est important de dire quelle sorte des édifices est-ce qu'on construit au Canada maintenant? Est-ce que les maisons qu'on construit maintenant, les condos, est-ce qu'ils sont les propres constructions pour notre population maintenant? Il faut qu'on adresse le gap qui existe maintenant dans les single-family homes pour les personnes et surtout dans les villes. J'espère que j'ai répondu bien à mon collègue.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Elmwood, Transcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very glad to be talking about the issue of housing here today in the House of Commons. There absolutely has been an astronomical increase in the cost of housing over the last 5 or 6 years, and particularly acute in the last 2 years. But I do think we have to note that this is part of a longer standing trend. So, house prices in December 2010 were about $345,000, and by November of 2015, they were about $450,000. Now they're about $713,000. But in the 5 years between 2010 and 2015, that's still a 32% increase. And that coincided with another government that was largely absent when it came to the housing file. And the fact of the matter is these numbers, even if you go back to 2010 prices, are out of reach still for a lot of Canadians. And the answer has to be substantial investment in rent geared to income housing that is non-market housing, a strategy that doesn't treat our homes as if they're a commodity to be traded on the market, and that requires public expenditure. So the member continues to say that the answer to the housing crisis is for government to stop spending money when that clearly cannot issue in the kinds of rent geared to income housing that we need in order to address a significant part of the housing crisis in Canada. And I'd like to know what the member proposes if it's not any kind of government spending. If developers were going to build housing for all the Canadians who need it, presumably they'd have done it by now. And they don't just need another incremental tax break to finally start doing that. That's not their business. So what is the the member's proposal for a real solution to get the kind of housing built that we need in this country.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, I thank my honourable colleague for that question. He's an excellent colleague on the Finance Committee, and he comes up with some great proposals going forward. And I think I did address in my speech, and I hope he heard it all, about what some of the solutions we have for bringing down the escalating prices of Canadian houses are, and that is to actually address the money laundering. The amount of money laundering the amount of foreign buyers that are in the Canadian marketplace are excessive, and it's like any purchase. When there's a whole bunch of excess buyers in the marketplace, it does inflate the cost of something. And those foreign buyers are coming here for one reason only, because it's safe to launder money in Canada. More safe than it is in the rest of the G20. So that money's arriving on the shores of Canada, going into one of the safest investments in Canada, housing. Who's being impacted by that? The people that work in Canada that are having the housing that they usually occupy being bought, being invested in, and being occupied sometimes by people that don't work and live here. That's a problem. That's what we need to address more than anything else. I know my colleague addressed this issue about the government needs to invest in this sector more and more. The government invests in sectors because there's a short-term gap. This gap is growing and growing and growing, and it is not because we're not building enough in Canada. As I said in my speech, we spend a far greater percentage of our gross domestic product on residential housing than any other of the G7 countries. There's a reason for that. We're building the wrong kind of product. We're building product for investment, primarily foreign investment, that isn't necessarily the right foreign investment we're looking for. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the issue of a capital tax or equity tax on homes came up in 2019, the Liberals have been denying it, and I'd like to take them at their word. But since then, and my honourable colleague mentioned this in his speech, CMHC, Crown Corporation of the Government of Canada, requisitioned a report on the recommendation of their former head, Mr. Siddall, from Generation Squeeze, which recommended this very policy. Now, I appreciate the fact that members opposite have been denying that they're going to do this, but why have they not specifically repudiated this report, particularly after Mr. Siddall went public and endorsed this recommendation himself after he was no longer head of the corporation?
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, that's an excellent question from my colleague, and I thank him very much for that question. Mr. Siddall, the former head of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, did accept and did hire Generation Squeeze to give him this report. And that's government money. The $250,000, we're still trying to figure out if they paid the $250,000 for one report and another $250,000 for the second report. We've asked for that, and we haven't received it yet. This is one of the issues, is that we're pushing money to people to come up with solutions, and those solutions they're providing have nothing to do with the problem they're supposedly addressing. An extra surtax on the sale of housing when you sell the house is a capital gains tax, whether you call it that or not. And I know this is the inequitability we talked about in my speech. Who's going to pay that tax? Canadian senior citizens are going to pay that tax by and large. And that is a shame, because we're doing everything we can to keep them above the inflation line here as a result of the diminishing returns they're getting because of inflation in this economy. Fixed incomes get hurt the most by inflationary economies. We need to make sure we stay above that. Adding a tax onto our seniors is the wrong approach to addressing that. Thank you.
We have time for maybe one quick one. We'll go to the member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his intervention. I just want to point out, though, that, you know, the pandemic isn't over and people are struggling, yet his party has fought consistently to claw back support to individuals, including calling to abolish the CERB. We know rent is going up, we know groceries are going up, and we know the support isn't coming, and people are ending up on the streets, including seniors who had clawbacks made to their GIS. I'm wondering if his concern extends to ensuring people continue to get the support they need, and whether he would consider implementing instead a permanent guaranteed livable basic income for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre, and a short answer.
Well, I don't have a short answer, Mr. Speaker, but I will try my best, and I appreciate the question from my colleague there. I'm not a fan of a guaranteed basic income. I am a fan, frankly, of making sure that our monetary base stays relevant. As we inflate that monetary base, we effectively devalue the spending power of the money that people have. By devaluing that spending power, you are actually hurting those people that have to spend those money on basic goods. So get ahead of it, don't debase the currency, and you won't have to address more spending later. Thank you.